In old cartoons, there was a recurring comedic gag where a seasoned fisherman would cast his line into the vast ocean, anticipating a mighty fish, only to reel in an unexpected item like an old tire or a boot. As with most humor, this joke resonated because it held a grain of truth. The ocean can truly hold a bewildering array of objects. However, on one recent fishing expedition miles away from the shoreline, 3 experienced lobster fishermen were confronted with a sight that defied explanation, something entirely out of place in the ocean. Uncertain if their eyes were deceiving them, they felt compelled to investigate further. Rendor, a skilled lobster fisherman proud of his contribution to the annual 126 million pounds of seafood caught in Maine, found himself unable to concentrate on lobster that day. He and his companions, Jared Thaxter and Sean Dowling, set sail on the Riss and Stace, a 32-foot fishing vessel departing from a harbor along the northeast coast of Maine, near the small city of Harrington. About 5 miles from the shore, they began their work, with Captain Dorr deploying what lobster fishermen call a triple 3 trap suspended from a single line. As they headed towards another buoy, south of Nash Island, an unusual sight captured their attention. A dark and peculiar shape emerged from the water, drifting away from the land towards the open sea. All 3 fishermen rushed to the starboard side, squinting against the sun's glare on the waves, trying to discern what they were seeing. The object turned out to be an animal of some kind, but it appeared lifeless, showing no signs of struggle, simply drifting with the current. Their lobster-catching plans were abruptly abandoned. It was just going with the flow, Captain Dorr recalled. It wasn't trying to fight it or swim with it. It was just kind of floating along. The animal, if alive, seemed to have accepted its grim fate 5 miles from the shore. Considering the numerous wildlife-inhabited islands near Harrington's coastline, the fishermen speculated that a swimmer might have been carried away by the current. Nash Island, in particular, was home to several migrant bird species and sheep, so various possibilities crossed their minds. "I'm sure he had been going from island to island or shore to an island," the captain surmised, "and he couldn't see or got caught in the current." When they finally brought their vessel closer to the animal, its antlers revealed its identity as a deer. Rendor noticed the exhausted state of the poor creature, likely in the water for over 6 hours according to the tides, which explained its seemingly lifeless condition. The captain turned to his crew and issued a decisive command: "We gotta grab him." Initially met with disbelief, Captain Dorr's order eventually spurred his crew, Sean and Jared, into action. They devised a plan involving a rope fashioned into a makeshift lasso, attempting to secure the deer's antlers. However, capturing a deer on choppy seas proved to be as challenging as wrangling a steer on a bucking bronco. Undeterred, Captain Dorr swapped the rope for a gaff, a hooked stick used by fishermen for snagging sizable catches. Leaning over the boat's side, he engaged in an epic struggle reminiscent of the Old Man and the Sea, until he successfully hooked the deer's antler. With renewed determination, they managed to haul the 100-pound deer aboard the Riss and Stace, despite the probable trauma it had endured. Once safe on deck, the deer lay down, seemingly relieved. With a shivering, exhausted deer on their vessel and no means to comfort it, Captain Dorr made a swift decision to alleviate the animal's suffering. Half an hour later, with a 4th crew member on board, they returned to Harrington. Without sentimental hesitation, the fishermen released the deer back into the water when the ship was approximately 50 yards from the shore. "I dropped him in," Captain Dorr recalled, "and he was kind of dazed there for a second. Then he turned and saw that land was right there, and he smoked it for land. In no time at all, the deer was safely ashore, grazing once more." Captain Rendor looked back on the rescue with pride, knowing that the deer's survival was far from guaranteed if they hadn't intervened. He was gonna die, 100%. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. He was a goner, he affirmed. "I couldn't have that on my conscience, obviously. That's not the guy that I am, so I figured I'd bring him in." Following this daring rescue, the crew promptly returned to their fishing duties. They also breathed a collective sigh of relief, recognizing the potential dangers of having a startled buck aboard their vessel, as they had heard their fair share of animal rescue horror stories, similar to one involving 3 construction workers in Estonia. The workers approached the bank of the Parnu River, driven by curiosity, and approximately 100 yards away, their attention was drawn to a frantic splashing in the water. It didn't take long for them to grasp the gravity of the situation. It was no ordinary creature they saw struggling. It was a dog. It was immediately apparent that this canine was in dire straits. The icy river undoubtedly chilled the poor pup to the bone, and judging by its struggles, it seemed unlikely to keep afloat for much longer. Without a moment's hesitation, the three men leaped into the river, swimming swiftly toward the distressed animal. Though the ice posed a formidable obstacle, their combined efforts allowed them to carve a path and bring the struggling dog to safety. They swiftly enveloped the shivering dog in a heavy blanket, affording them the first clear look at the animal. It was notably large, with thick fur and striking yellow eyes, a distinctive appearance for a common house pet. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the workers didn't linger to admire the dog's appearance. The blanket provided only minimal warmth, and they understood that proper medical care, not even a roaring fire, was needed to prevent the dog from succumbing to hypothermia. With the dog cradled in their arms, the men placed their newfound friend in their pickup truck and promptly contacted a local animal hospital. The hospital staff instructed them to bring her in without delay. The truck sped toward the hospital, and throughout the journey, the dog remained remarkably calm, almost sleeping the entire way with its head resting on Kartsep's lap. Even in its distressed state, it displayed a comforting, affectionate nature. Upon arriving at the hospital, veterinarians were immediately on hand, carrying the dog inside and commencing efforts to nurse her back to health. However, a perplexing revelation emerged. This wasn't a dog after all. Despite their expertise, the veterinarians found themselves unable to identify the animal. Faced with this mystery, they sought the assistance of a local hunter who was able to shed light on the situation. To their astonishment, it wasn't a dog, it was a wolf. The construction workers were left in shock. Not only had they misidentified the animal entirely, but they had unwittingly transported a live wolf in their vehicle without any form of restraint. If the wolf had desired, it could have easily posed a threat to their safety. Fortunately, the icy water had served to sedate the wolf, explaining its docility when the men had rescued it and placed it in their truck. However, this state of calmness was unlikely to last. After all, it was a wild animal. As the wolf regained strength, it began to exhibit typical behavior for a 1-year-old wolf confined within a small space. Concerned for their safety and that of the medical staff, the wolf was relocated to a cage. By the end of the day, the animal had made a full recovery, and the clinic was confident that she could be safely reintroduced to the wild. However, to err on the side of caution, Estonia's National Environmental Agency fitted the wolf with a GPS collar. Upon release, the wolf dashed off into the wilderness, swiftly disappearing from sight. Kartsep and his colleagues bid farewell to their unexpected companion, marking the end of an unforgettable day of work. The Estonian Union for the Protection of Animals expressed their gratitude for the outcome and commended all those involved, especially the construction workers who had rescued the wolf and the dedicated clinic staff who had provided care. Estonia, with a substantial portion of Europe's wolf population, was no stranger to such encounters. In fact, the wolf had been designated as Estonia's national animal a few months prior to this incident. Remarkably, this particular wolf was spotted in the wild just a month after its encounter with the construction workers. Photographic evidence placed it over 70 miles from where it had been released, indicating that this fortunate creature was thriving. While some may find it difficult to mistake a wolf for a dog, such misidentifications do occur frequently. Those who are unaware might inadvertently bring these doppelgangers home as pets. For example, one morning, as he was dropping his children off at school, Jostein Hansen noticed a tiny animal darting across a snow-covered road. Intrigued, the concerned father pulled over. Aware that small animals and busy roads were not a safe combination, he maneuvered through traffic with impressive speed and dexterity to rescue the creature. Jostein identified the animal as a hamster. Back at home, his own daughter owned one, so he had a fondness for these tiny rodents. He thought of the potential distress it would cause the pet's owners if it were lost and decided to find the rightful owner. With the hamster safely in his hands and thinking of how upset his daughter would be if her hamster went missing, he resolved to locate the owner. In the meantime, he placed the hamster in his glove box. Recognizing the need for assistance in reuniting the hamster with its owner, Jostein reached out to a Norwegian newspaper, i Tromsø. The story was subsequently assigned to Sanna Drogset Borstad, who, despite her initial reluctance, embarked on a mission to find the hamster's owner. Pulitzer Prizes, she understood, were typically not awarded for investigating lost Norwegian rodents. Nevertheless, she arranged a meeting with Jostein Hansen, the man who had rescued the hamster. Little did she know what this story would ultimately become. Accompanied by the rescued hamster, the two of them journeyed to a pet store affiliated with Animal Protection Norway, an organization committed to the welfare and dignity of animals. Among its 9,000 members, they hoped someone could help identify the hamster's original home. The pet store employee, however, offered assistance in a rather unexpected manner. The pet store employee carefully examined the hamster, turning the little creature over in her hands to assess its brown, black, and blonde fur. Then she delivered surprising news to the duo. It wasn't a hamster at all. In fact, what Jostein had chased down on that snowy Norwegian road wasn't a pet either. In a peculiar twist, he had unwittingly carried out a rodent napping. The creature, it turned out, was a Norway lemming indigenous to Norway, albeit bearing a strong resemblance to beloved pets. This revelation might leave you pondering. Given its behavior on the road, was it truly a lemming? After all, lemmings are often associated with reckless behaviors like leaping off cliffs. However, the truth differed significantly. Contrary to their portrayal in the popular video game series Lemmings, these critters are intelligent, expert burrowers, and they tend to migrate when their habitats become overcrowded. They thrive in their natural environments regardless of the weather conditions. Back at the pet store, Jostein recognized the need to return the lemming to its natural habitat. He and Sanna returned to the road where the lemming had been rescued, allowing it to roam freely in the snow, not on a hamster wheel. In the midst of a somber and overcast day, the duo released the lemming, waving as it made its way back home. Those involved couldn't help but share a laugh. They had unwittingly been part of one of the world's most bizarre cases of mistaken identity. While Sanna didn't win a Pulitzer for this story, she found herself smiling by the end of the day, having covered a story that no one involved would ever forget. As for Jostein, although some critics initially questioned the eager dad's actions, after all, he'd had picked up a wild animal without provocation. The pet store worker sided with the well-intentioned rescuer. He did the right thing, the worker affirmed. He saw an animal he thought needed help. Besides, that lemming did indeed bear a striking resemblance to a hamster. In fact, Jostein's decision to assist an animal he believed was in need was far superior to the alternative, allowing an animal to suffer because one assumed it was A-okay. Jim Passmore of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, learned a similar lesson. His usual haunt was Hakey Creek, a park cherished by outdoor enthusiasts who admired its abundance of pecan trees. One day, while waiting for his Yorkies to attend to their business, Jim spotted something unusual. A peculiar mass floated on the creek's surface, an anomaly amidst the normally serene waters. It was large, brown, and vaguely reminiscent of an animal. Squinting for a better view, Jim initially assumed it was a log, but he couldn't be certain. Inching closer to the shore, Jim stepped onto the muddy grass off the trail. Hoping for a closer look to satisfy his curiosity, he suddenly realized that the thing was not an inanimate object. It was covered in brown hair, and it was alive. Grateful for the opportunity to observe a wild creature in its natural setting, Jim's curiosity only grew. The unknown entity was moving, albeit weakly. Could it be stirring gently in its slumber? Floating, perhaps disturbed by a dream? Then his dogs began to snarl. As Jim moved closer to the creature, his small dogs grew increasingly agitated, snarling and growling as though sensing imminent danger. However, he became concerned when he noticed the creature's feeble movements, which appeared to indicate desperation and entrapment. Given the wooded, muddy creek bank where the creature was found, initial signs suggested that it might be a beaver. However, a disturbing discovery in the underbrush suggested a more sinister situation. A large abandoned carrier, typically used for transporting pets to the vet, was accompanied by a filthy blanket. Even more troubling was the presence of a heavy-weighted chain beneath the blanket. Standing there, Jim attempted to piece together the situation. It was evident that someone had discarded the carrier. Judging by the disarray, a soiled blanket, the chain, and the cage showing signs of being bitten and mangled, it seemed that a cruel individual had abandoned a helpless creature in the wild. It was clear that someone had intended harm, but the animal had managed to escape. Jim's understanding of the situation grew, and a rustling in the woods diverted his attention. Another beaver emerged from the undergrowth, seemingly unafraid of human contact. The beaver moved into the open, and Jim watched in astonishment as it approached the mystery creature. Interpreting this encounter as a positive omen, Jim cautiously moved toward the creature, which stirred weakly in the muddy water. Side by side, Jim knew he had initially misjudged the situation. The creature was far too large to be a beaver, unless it was a giant radioactive one. Throughout the ordeal, the distressed creature had been concealed by muck and grime, obscuring the fact that it was a magnificent collie. Realizing his mistake, Jim stepped into the creek, determined to rescue the stranded dog. Taking no chances, Jim called out to other pedestrians for assistance in freeing the dog. A small group gathered, but as Jim had feared, any approach sent the distressed dog into a frenzy. It bit one person who got too close. With the dog still mired in the mud, Jim had to rethink their approach. They needed a cautious strategy. Grabbing the agitated animal would only worsen the situation. They required a distraction. An idea struck Jim. The dog couldn't bite what it couldn't see. He grabbed a dark sweatshirt and gently draped it over the dog's head, blocking out all vision and light. Surprisingly, this seemed to calm the panicked animal. Now that the dog was more composed, they had to extract it from the mud. It had sunk further, and standing in the muck was becoming precarious. They needed a makeshift pulley system. Using dog leashes, they fashioned a rudimentary lift and looped the ropes around the dog's belly. With feet planted firmly, the group began to heave. Despite their combined strength, it was as if the dog were glued in place. After a high-stakes game of tug-of-war, they finally managed to free the dog. Overjoyed, Jim pulled back the covering and wiped away the mud to reveal the dog's face. The dog appeared thankful, but understandably terrified. There was no way to know how long the poor creature had struggled to free itself from the mud after its owner callously abandoned it. All they could confirm was that the handsome dog appeared to be in good health. Jim, a lifelong dog lover, was furious. He couldn't comprehend how anyone could mistreat an animal, let alone their own pet. He called the police, and officers arrived promptly. Finally, the frightened pet had advocates, and they set to work ensuring its safety. Upon further investigation, the police began to piece together the sad story of the dog's ordeal. Trapped inside the animal carrier, the dog had attempted to escape by biting its way out. It was then cruelly discarded on the street. At some point, the carrier had been struck by a car, sending it tumbling into the forest, where it landed in the muddy bank of the creek. Through some miracle, the dog had survived this horrific ordeal, mostly unharmed but surely traumatized. If it hadn't been for the timely appearance of the beaver, who knows if the dog would have made it out of the mud. However, this mysterious event raised more questions than answers. Was the beaver signaling to another animal in distress, or was it just a coincidental appearance? Nevertheless, there was no time to ponder the mystery. Officers realized that the dog was in no condition to walk out of the area. They needed to transport the sizable dog, which they had affectionately dubbed Teddy, due to his resemblance to a stuffed animal, to a veterinarian for an examination. Teddy was utterly exhausted from his struggle in the mud. He also appeared to be overweight, which combined with potential injuries, made leading him on a leash impossible. Fortunately, the rescuers found a wheelbarrow nearby. Wrapped in a blanket, Teddy was carefully placed in the wheelbarrow and wheeled out of the area. Jim's next call was to the Oklahoma Alliance for Animals, and within minutes they made arrangements to take Teddy into their care. In a way, Teddy had narrowly escaped another attempt on his life. Being taken in by the OAA gave him a chance at rehabilitation. His fearful demeanor and justified lack of trust in humans could have marked him for euthanasia if he had been brought to a shelter. Additionally, Teddy had bitten one of his rescuers, which unfortunately often leads to euthanasia. The rescue group, however, refused to give up hope for his future. They ran tests to rule out rabies, and the results came back clear. Teddy was rabies-free, but he still had a long journey ahead to regain his health and find a new family. As the kind-hearted rescue workers showered Teddy with love and care, his initial hostility melted away. In its place emerged a gentle, somewhat slimmer, long-coated sweetheart. Teddy's story gained widespread attention, and he had a dedicated fan base cheering him on as he embarked on his fitness journey. It didn't take long for Teddy to find his happily ever after. Jesse, a vet tech at the rescue, fell in love with his soulful puppy dog eyes. It seemed that the forces of nature had ensured Teddy was found and granted the fairy tale life he so deserved.